The crimson sky of Velthora burned like a dying star, as massive shadows blocked out what little sunlight remained. Commander Hyenwoo Kim pressed his six-fingered hands against the reinforced glass of the observation deck, watching another Vorthok swarm ship break through the atmosphere. The biomechanical nightmare descended slowly, almost mockingly, its organic hull pulsing with veins of sickly green light. "How many does that make?" he asked, though he already knew the answer would bring no comfort. 47 nest ships in the last 6 hours, sir," replied his aide. A young Zilani named Kale, whose usually bright purple skin had faded to a worried gray. "They're not even bothering to scan for defenses anymore." Huno's elongated ears twitched with nervous energy. 3 months ago, the Zilani had been celebrating the harvest season on 12 different worlds. Their people had never needed weapons beyond simple tools for farming. They traded in art, music, and knowledge with other peaceful species across the galaxy. War was something they read about in historical texts from barbaric civilizations. Then, the Vorthok arrived. The first attack came without warning. The swarm ships had emerged from deep space like a plague, falling upon the outer colonies with horrifying efficiency. The Vorthok didn't just conquer worlds, they consumed them. Every living thing became food for their ever-growing numbers. Trees, animals, even the Zilani themselves were dragged into the bioships to feed the hungry mass of parasitic creatures. "Sir, the defense grid is failing," Communications Officer Tajian called from his station. His voice cracked with exhaustion. They'd been fighting for 72 hours straight. But what could farming equipment and civilian shuttles do against a species designed for consumption? Through the viewports, Hyenwoo watched as the last of New Zelthoris cities burned. Elegant spires that had taken centuries to grow were being dissolved by Vorthok acid sprayers. The creatures moved through the streets like living nightmares, their multiple arms reaching out to grab anything that moved. Some were the size of small vehicles, others no bigger than insects, but all shared the same terrible hunger. The emergency beacon Tajian continued, his blue blood draining from his face. "It's our final option, sir, but the targeting system is locked onto sector designation Terran 7. The database classifies it as primitive, pre-space civilization." Hyenwoo felt his heart sinking. Of all the advanced civilizations in the galaxy, their desperate signal would reach the one species nobody wanted to contact. The files on humans made for terrifying reading. They came from a world so dangerous that most galactic species considered it uninhabitable. Crushing gravity, deadly weather, toxic atmosphere had forged them into something the galaxy feared: Deathworlders. The reports described creatures that solved every problem through violence. They turned their own planet's deadly nature into weapons, where other species evolved cooperation and peace. Humans had become apex predators who hunted everything, including each other. Their homeworld was so violent that they considered war a form of entertainment. "The humans will either ignore us or come to finish what the Vorthok started," Hyenwoo muttered. But even as he spoke, he knew they had no choice. "Prepare the transmission. Include everything: star charts, species data, tactical analysis of Vorthok behavior. If we're going to die, at least someone should know what killed us." Tajian's clawed fingers danced across the communications panel, the beacon charged with a high-pitched whine that made everyone on the bridge wince. "Message loaded, sir. Full spectrum broadcast, maximum power. If there's anyone listening in that sector, they'll hear us." "Send it," Hyenwoo whispered. "May the stars forgive us for what we might have unleashed." The signal burst into space at faster-than-light speeds, carrying the Zilani's desperate plea across the void, light years away. In the outer rim of what humans called their territorial space, Captain Duyan Park was having a perfectly ordinary morning aboard the dreadnought Thunder's Edge. The massive warship cruised through the darkness between stars, its crew performing routine maintenance and training exercises. Duyan sipped her morning coffee while reviewing patrol reports from the frontier sectors. The human ship was a testament to their species' approach to engineering. Where other races built elegant vessels that flowed like water or grew like plants, humans constructed angular monsters of reinforced steel and controlled explosions. Thunder's Edge bristled with weapon systems that could crack asteroids and armor, plating thick enough to ram through space stations. "Captain, we're picking up something unusual," Lieutenant Minho called from the communications station. His Korean accent carried clearly across the bridge as he adjusted his headset. "It's an alien transmission, but it's not from any of our usual contacts." Doyen set down her coffee and moved to the main display. The bridge crew gathered around as the signal resolved into clear audio and visual data. What they saw made hardened military veterans go quiet. The message showed scenes of devastation that reminded Duyan of historical footage from Earth's worst natural disasters. But this wasn't weather or earthquakes, living creatures with many limbs and hungry mouths were systematically devouring an entire civilization. The aliens sending the message looked gentle, almost fragile, with their colorful skin and large, frightened eyes. "They're asking for help against something called the Vorthok," Minho translated as the alien language scrolled across his screen. "It's a parasitic species. Captain, they're being eaten alive." Duyan studied the tactical data that accompanied the plea. The Vorthok moved like a swarm of locusts, consuming everything in their path. 12 worlds had already fallen, with billions of casualties. The mathematical projections showed complete extinction of the Zilani species within weeks. Her jaw tightened as she recognized the pattern. This wasn't war, it was extermination. The kind of systematic destruction that humans had seen before in their own dark history. "Get me Admiral Jason on priority channel," she ordered, her voice taking on the edge that her crew knew meant business. "And prep the ship for immediate departure. These aliens just made contact with the wrong species to mess with." Communication array reached out across space to contact the human fleet command. Duyan looked once more at the images of destruction on her screen. The Vorthok might be efficient predators in their own right, but they were about to learn what happened when they threatened innocent life in a galaxy that also contained humanity. The real hunters were coming. Admiral Jae-Sung Lee stood at the center of the war room, his weathered hands gripping the edge of the holographic display table. The three-dimensional map showed the Vorthok infestation spreading like a cancer across Zilani space. Red indicators marked consumed worlds, while yellow warnings blinked where the swarm was still feeding. "Talk to me, Colonel," he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent 30 years protecting humanity's borders. Colonel Soo-jin stepped forward. Her uniform crisp, despite being pulled from sleep 2 hours ago. "The Vorthok are unlike anything we've encountered before, sir. They're not just conquerors, they're biological weapons. Each swarm ship carries millions of individual organisms that work together like a single entity." She activated a detailed scan of a captured Vorthok creature. The thing looked like a nightmare fusion of insect and octopus, with multiple feeding appendages and razor-sharp mandibles.
Ow.
They reproduce by consuming living tissue. One adult can spawn hundreds of offspring. Within hours, if given enough organic matter, Commander Dong Haen, the fleet's tactical expert, leaned over the display. 12 Zilani worlds consumed in 3 months. Population estimates suggest over 8 billion casualties so far. At this rate, the entire species will be extinct within weeks. Jae-Sung's jaw tightened. He'd seen genocide before, but this was different. This was farming on a galactic scale. What about their technology? Can they be reasoned with? Negative, Sir Soo-jin replied. Intelligence suggests they're driven purely by biological imperative. No language, no culture, no negotiation. They exist only to consume and reproduce. Think of them as a virus that evolved to eat planets. The Admiral walked around the table, studying the enemy positions. His command staff watched him with the respect that came from knowing their leader had never lost a battle that mattered. Jae-Sung had earned his reputation fighting off 3 separate alien invasions of human space. His tactics were legendary among the fleet. "What's our available force structure?" he asked. 67 ships within range, sir, reported Captain Mung-soo from the logistics station. 3rd Fleet is completing maneuvers in the Centauri sector. 5th Fleet can be recalled from the Outer Rim. Combined, we're looking at 12 battleships. 18 cruisers, 24 destroyers, and supporting vessels. Meanwhile, light years away on the dying world of Zelthera Prime, Leader Vexstar huddled in the emergency command bunker with what remained of his planetary council. The elegant chamber that once hosted diplomatic meetings now served as a tomb for a civilization. Emergency lighting cast eerie shadows on walls decorated with traditional Zilani artwork that would soon be lost forever. The human response has begun, his communications officer reported, her voice shaking as she monitored the intercepted transmissions. Their military frequencies are extremely active. Star's forearms wrapped around himself in a gesture of despair. Through the reinforced walls, they could hear the distant sounds of Vorthok feeding swarms moving through the capital city. His people's screams had stopped hours ago. There was nothing left to scream. What are they saying? They asked, though he dreaded the answer. The communications officer's skin shifted to a deep purple, the Zilani equivalent of pure terror. They speak of acceptable losses and saturation bombing patterns. One of their commanders mentioned cleaning protocols. For contaminated worlds, Council member Raxtum, an elderly Zilani who'd lived through the golden age of their civilization, let out a sound of pure anguish. We called upon demons to save us from monsters. The humans will finish what the Vorthok started, Vexstar accessed. The classified files on human military doctrine. The records painted a picture of a species that viewed violence as the solution to every problem. They had fought wars against their own kind for thousands of years, turning their homeworld into a battlefield. When they reached the stars, they brought that same destructive nature with them. Perhaps Vexstar whispered to his council, death, by our own invitation, is more honorable than slow consumption by parasites. At least the humans might make it quick. But on Thunder's Edge, Admiral Jaezoon was thinking about something entirely different. He stood before a tactical display showing Zilani population centers, his mind working through the complex mathematics of rescue operations. The challenge isn't destroying the Vorthok, he explained to his staff. It's doing it without harming the civilians. These aliens have never seen real warfare. They don't know how to take cover or evacuate properly. Colonel Sujin nodded. Our standard orbital bombardment would eliminate the swarm, but the collateral damage would be unacceptable. We need surgical precision. Exactly, Jaezoon agreed. I want specialized ammunition loads for urban combat, incendiary rounds designed to target organic material without damaging infrastructure. And get me a full xenobiology team. I need to know everything about how these parasites think and move. Captain. Youngji entered the briefing room, her assault carrier's crews already preparing for deployment. The Reaper's Dawn was humanity's most advanced carrier, equipped with fighters specifically designed for swarm combat. Her pilots were the best in the fleet, trained to operate in the chaos of multi-target engagements. Admiral, my squadrons are armed and ready, she reported. We've loaded the new plasma charges developed for insectoid threats. Each fighter can carry enough firepower to sterilize a city block without touching the buildings. The Zilani don't understand what we're planning, Jaezoon noted, reviewing the intercepted alien communications. They think we're coming to replace the Vorthok as their destroyers. Captain Myung-soo pulled up a display showing the human fleet's assembly. 67 warships were converging on the rally point, their formation a perfect demonstration of military precision. Each ship bristled with weapons that could crack moons, but every system was being calibrated for the most delicate operation possible, saving a species that feared their saviors. Should we contact them directly? Dong Hein suggested. Explain our intentions. Jaezoon shook his head. They wouldn't believe us. Frankly, if I were them, I wouldn't either. We're about to bring enough firepower to glass their entire star system. Words won't convince them we're here to help. He turned to address the entire command staff. What will convince them is results. We save their people, we eliminate the threat, and we do it with minimal collateral damage. The Vorthok chose the wrong species to hunt. It's time to remind the galaxy why humans are apex predators. Captain Yoonji smiled grimly. Sir, the Zilani called us Deathworlders. No idea how right they are? Or death to anything that threatens innocent life? Launch the fleet, Admiral Jaezoon ordered. Maximum speed to Zilani space. And send a message to all ships. We're not going to war. We're going hunting. The human armada began its journey through hyperspace. 67 ships carrying the deadliest military force the galaxy had ever seen. But their mission wasn't conquest or destruction. They were racing to save a species that had given up hope, daring the fury of a race that had never learned to abandon the innocent. The Vorthok were about to discover. What happened when an apex predator decided to protect instead of hunt? Reality itself seemed to tear apart as the human fleet materialized above New Zalthera. The hyperspace exit created a brilliant flash that lit up the dying world's atmosphere, followed by the most terrifying sight the Zilani had ever witnessed. 67 warships hung in space like mechanical predators, their hulls scarred from countless battles across the galaxy. The flagship Thunder's Edge dominated the formation, a kilometer-long monster of reinforced steel and devastating weaponry. Its surface bristled with missile tubes, plasma cannons, and point defense systems that could track 1,000 targets simultaneously. Smaller cruisers flanked the battleships, their sleek designs built for speed and precision strikes, but it was the destroyers that truly showed humanity's predatory nature. These ships moved like a pack of wolves, weaving through space in coordinated patterns that spoke of countless hours of combat training. Each destroyer carried enough firepower to level a city, yet they moved with the grace of hunters who'd learned to kill efficiently. On the surface of New Zalthera, Vextar pressed himself against the reinforced walls of the command bunker as the ground shook. Through the observation windows, he could see Vorthok swarm ships rising from feeding grounds to meet this new threat. The parasitic creatures sensed danger and were converging on the human fleet with hungry desperation. "Leader, they're hailing us on all frequencies," his communications officer reported, her voice barely a whisper. Around the bunker, the surviving members of the Zilani Council prepared for their final moments. They'd called the Deathworlders, and now those same creatures hung above their world like avenging angels. "Put it through," Vextar said, his forearms trembling as he activated the main display. The face that appeared was weathered and scarred, with eyes that had seen too much war. This was Admiral Jae-Sung Lee, the human who would decide their fate. "Zilani forces, this is Admiral Lee of the Human Defense Fleet." The pervert is untaunted. The words were translated by their computers, but the tone needed no interpretation. This was the voice of absolute authority. "We received your distress call. Provide civilian evacuation coordinates immediately. We're here to eliminate the Vorthok threat." Vextar stared at the communication panel, his mind struggling to process what he'd just heard. They want to help us." The words came out as barely a whisper, but his staff heard them clearly. "It must be a trick," Councilmember Raxton insisted. "The humans are Deathworlders. They don't help, they conquer." But before anyone could respond, the human fleet began to move. What the Zilani witnessed next would haunt their dreams and inspire their children for generations to come. Captain Hyochin's battleship Stormbringer rotated slowly, bringing its massive forward guns to bear on the largest Vorthok nest ship. The biomechanical horror was the size of a small moon, its surface crawling with feeding tentacles and spawning chambers. It had been consuming the northern continent for weeks, growing larger with each meal. "Target acquired, Hyogen," announced over the fleet channel. "Firing solution locked." The Stormbringer's main guns erupted in a display of controlled fury. Guided missiles streaked through space, each one burning like a miniature star. They struck the nest ship with precision that defied belief, targeting specific sections that contained the creature's primary nerve clusters. The explosions tore through biomechanical flesh, causing the massive organism to writhe in agony before going still. "One down," Hyogen reported calmly, moving to secondary targets. But the real show began when the fighters launched. Captain Yunji's assault carrier Reaper's Dawn opened its bay doors, releasing squadrons of sleek interceptors piloted by humanity's finest. These weren't the elegant craft of peaceful species. These were angular death machines, designed for one purpose: the complete destruction of their targets. Lieutenant Thejin led the first squadron into the swarm of smaller bioships that were rising. From the planet's surface, her fighter Calcine Razor dove through the enemy formation with moves that seemed to defy physics. The Vorthok creatures tried to surround her, their chitinous hulls glistening with digestive acids. "This is Razor," she called over the comm, beginning pest control operations. Her weapons were specifically designed for this moment. Instead of standard plasma bolts, her fighter carried experimental rounds that targeted organic matter. Shot created a chain reaction in the bioship's living hulls, causing them to literally dissolve from the inside out. The Vorthok creatures that had seemed so terrifying now fell apart like rotten fruit. "Beautiful work, Razor," came the voice of Lieutenant Deho. His fighter Reaper was carving through another group of bioships. "These bugs don't know what hit them." The rest of the squadron followed their lead, turning the space around New Zelthera into a graveyard of dissolved biomass. The Vorthok had never faced opponents like this. Their swarm tactics, so effective against peaceful species, were useless against predators who understood violence on a fundamental level. Down on the surface, Vexstar watched the display with growing amazement. The humans weren't just winning, they were dominating. Every move was calculated, every shot precise. They fought like they'd been born for this moment. "Admiral," he broadcast on the open channel, his voice shaking with emotion. "This is Leader Vexstar of the Zilani. We don't know how to thank you." Jasung's response came immediately, his voice carrying across the chaos of battle. "Save. The thanks for after we finish the job. I need those evacuation coordinates. My people are good, but we can't protect you if we don't know where you are." The Zilani leadership scrambled to provide the information, transmitting the locations of every shelter, every hidden bunker, every group of survivors across their dying world. The data flowed to the human fleet. Something wonderful happened. The human ships began to move with even greater precision. Destroyers positioned themselves over civilian areas, their point defense systems creating protective barriers against falling debris. Medical ships that had been hidden in the formation now moved forward, preparing to assist with evacuations. All Vorthok vessels in this system will be destroyed. Admiral Jasun announced, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "Zilani evacuation ships have safe passage. Any civilian craft attempting to leave the surface will be escorted by our fighters." Captain Yunji coordinated the fighter escorts, or pilots forming protective formations around the few Zilani transport ships that were still operational. "This is Reaper's Dawn to all civilian vessels. You're under our protection. Proceed to the coordinates we're transmitting." As the battle continued, the truth became clear to everyone watching. The humans hadn't come as conquerors. They hadn't come to replace one threat with another. They'd come as exterminators, and their target was the species that had dared to threaten innocent life. The Deathworlders were doing exactly what their reputation claimed: they were death itself. Only to those who deserved it. For the Zilani cowering in their shelters and watching their saviors work, the humans had become something else entirely. They had become hope. The first drop pods screamed through New Zelelthera's atmosphere like falling meteors, their heat shields glowing white-hot as they punched through the toxic clouds left behind by Vorthok feeding swarms. Major Seong-ho gripped his harness as his pod shook violently, the automated systems guiding him toward the designated landing zone in what used to be the Zilani capital's cultural district. 30 seconds to impact, his suit's AI announced. In his ear, through the small viewport, he could see the devastation below. What had once been elegant spires and flowing architecture was now a nightmare landscape of organic growths and feeding pits. The Vorthok had been busy. The pod slammed into the ground with bone-jarring force, its retro thrusters firing at the last second to prevent a fatal impact. Seong-ho was moving before the dust settled, his environmental suit's sensors already analyzing the toxic atmosphere. The air was thick with spores and digestive chemicals that would dissolve most species' lungs within minutes. "Good thing we're not most species," he muttered, checking his weapon systems. His assault rifle was loaded with incendiary rounds specifically designed for organic targets. Every piece of equipment he carried had been chosen for one purpose: the complete elimination of the Vorthok threat. Around him, other pods were landing in synchronized waves. Sergeant Dayun's squad touched down 50 meters to his left, their heavy weapons specialists already unpacking a portable flamethrower. The device looked like something from humanity's darkest wars, but it had been modified with alien technology to burn at temperatures that would sterilize organic matter without damaging inorganic structures. Movement detected, Dayun reported. Over the come, looks like we've got welcoming committee. The Vorthok emerged from hidden feeding tunnels like a wave of nightmares. They moved with the coordinated hunger of a hive mind, their multiple limbs propelling them across the broken ground with horrifying speed. Some were the size of dogs, others as large as vehicles, but all shared the same terrible purpose: consume everything that lived. Open fire, So Yang-Ho ordered. The human Marines responded with the precision that came from years of training against the galaxy's worst threats. Their weapons spoke in controlled bursts, each shot placed with surgical accuracy. The incendiary rounds didn't just kill the Vorthok, they caused them to burn from the inside out, preventing any chance of regeneration or spawning. Dayun's flamethrower roared to life, sending a stream of superheated plasma into a cluster of smaller creatures. "That's how we handle pest control on Earth," she shouted over the sound of combat. The Vorthok caught in the flames didn't just die, they were completely sterilized, their biological matter reduced to harmless ash. But the real work began when they reached the tunnel systems. Intelligence had identified these underground networks as the primary breeding grounds where captured Zilani civilians were being processed into biomass for the swarm's reproduction. The tunnels were filled with toxic gases and organic growths that made them impassable for most species. Humans weren't most species. Captain Wu Jin's demolition team moved through the tunnels like they owned them. Their environmental suits filtered out the poisonous atmosphere while their enhanced vision systems cut through the darkness. Each Marine carried specialized equipment designed for urban warfare and hostile environments, equipment that no peaceful species would ever think to develop. Breeding chamber identified, Wu Jin reported, studying the massive organic structure that had grown in what used to be a Zilani shopping center. The chamber pulsed with sickly light, its walls lined with cocoons containing half-digested victims, setting shaped charges for controlled demolition. The explosives were works of art in their precision. Instead of crude bombs that would bring down the entire structure, these charges were designed to collapse only the breeding chamber while leaving the surrounding Zilani buildings intact. Wu Jin's team placed them with the skill of surgeons, calculating angles and blast patterns that would eliminate the threat without causing unnecessary damage. "Fire in the hole," he announced, and the charges detonated in a carefully orchestrated sequence. The breeding chamber collapsed in on itself, its biological components crushed and burned by the controlled explosion. Above ground, the Zilani buildings remained untouched. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Kyung-Suk's specialized unit was dealing with a different kind of problem. Her team carried sonic weapons that looked like oversized speakers, but their purpose was far more sinister. The devices generated sound frequencies that specifically targeted the Vorthok nervous system, causing the creatures to lose coordination and collapse in agony. "It's like they studied our biology for years," observed Dr. Haewon, the team's xenobiologist. As she watched the weapons work, these frequencies shouldn't affect any other known species, but they're devastating to the Vorthok. The truth was exactly that. Human scientists had spent months analyzing the biological samples from the initial Zilani transmission, identifying weaknesses that could be exploited. Every weapon, every tactic, every piece of equipment had been designed with one goal: the complete elimination of the Vorthok species while minimizing harm to everyone else. High above the surface, Colonel Gin-Ho coordinated orbital strikes from his command ship. His targeting systems painted laser designations on Vorthok nest ships and landing sites, while carefully avoiding any structure that might contain Zilani survivors. "Target acquired," he announced, watching a massive bioship that had been feeding on the planet's northern ocean. Firing solution calculated. Impact in 3, 1. The orbital bombardment struck with pinpoint accuracy. The bioship, which had been the size of a city, simply ceased to exist. The explosion was contained to prevent radiation or debris from harming the surrounding area. But the Vorthok creature was completely vaporized in the underground command. Bunker Vextar and his council watched the tactical displays with growing amazement. The humans moved through their world like they'd been born for this kind of warfare. Every action was calculated, every move precise. Look at how they fight, Vextar said, pointing to footage of Lieutenant Kungskave's team clearing a spawning ground. They use fire, but only where it won't harm our buildings. They use explosives, but only to target the creatures. They use sound as a weapon, but it only affects the Vorthok. Councilmember Raxton, who had lived long enough to see the rise and fall of several galactic civilizations, shook his head in wonder. They fight like they understand the enemy better than the enemy understands itself. Every weapon is perfectly designed for this specific threat. The truth of that observation became clear as the hours passed. The humans weren't just superior warriors, they were superior problem solvers. They had taken the time to study their enemy, identify its weaknesses, develop countermeasures that were devastatingly effective. Sergeant Minchun's squad demonstrated this as they cleared the last major infestation site. Instead of simply burning everything, used targeted bioweapons that attacked the Vorthok's reproductive system, while leaving all other organic matter untouched. The weapons were so precise that they could kill a Vorthok larva while leaving a Zalani flower growing inches away completely unharmed. That's impossible, whispered one of Vextar's scientific advisors. The level of biological understanding required to create such weapons, they would need to know more about the Vorthok than we know about ourselves. Perhaps they do, Vextar replied. Perhaps that's what makes them apex predators. They don't just hunt, they understand. As the sun set on the third day of the ground assault, Major Siongo stood in what had once been New Zelthora's central plaza. Around him, Marines were securing the last few areas while cleanup crews began the process of environmental restoration. The Vorthok were gone, completely eliminated with a thoroughness that bordered on the surgical. All teams report status, he called over the general comm. Sector 7 clear, came Dayun's voice. No Vorthok signatures detected. Tunnels are sealed and sterilized, Wujin added. Beginning structural assessment for civilian return. One by one, the reports came in. Every nest destroyed, every breeding ground sterilized, every trace of the Vorthok infestation eliminated. In 72 hours, the humans had accomplished what the Zalani had thought impossible. They had saved their world. The Deathworlders had proven that sometimes. The most dangerous predators in the galaxy were exactly what innocent prey needed. For protection, the diplomatic shuttle Peaceful Dawn drifted slowly toward the massive human flagship. Its elegant curves a stark contrast to the angular war machine that dominated the space above New Zelthera. Vextar sat in the passenger compartment, his four hands clutching a collection of surrender documents written in Zalani, Standard Galactic, and what their computers claimed was the human language called Korean. Leader, are you certain about this approach? Asked his aide Kale, whose purple skin had faded to an anxious gray. Perhaps we should wait and see what they demand first. Vextar's elongated ears drooped with exhaustion. 3 days ago, he had been preparing to watch his species die. Now, impossibly, his world was free of the Vorthok plague. But freedom always came with a price, and he had learned enough about galactic politics to know that powerful species didn't help weaker ones without expecting something in return. The humans saved us, he replied, reviewing the surrender terms one final time. Now we must face the cost of that salvation. At least we're alive to pay it. The shuttle's docking clamps engaged with a soft thud, and Vextar took a deep breath of filtered air. Round him, his small diplomatic team prepared for what they assumed would be their final act as free beings. They carried data pads containing their species' scientific knowledge, star charts of their territory, and economic assessments of their remaining resources. Everything the humans might want in exchange for their military intervention. The airlocks cycled open with a hiss. They stepped into the Thunder's edge. The interior was exactly what Vextar had expected from a Deathworlder vessel. Harsh lighting, metallic surfaces, and the constant hum of weapon systems on standby. Human Marines stood at attention along the corridors, their faces hidden behind tactical visors that made them look even more intimidating. But something was wrong. The humans weren't acting like conquerors. The Marines nodded respectfully as the Zilani delegation passed, and their escort, a young lieutenant named Ji-hoon, actually smiled when he greeted them. "Welcome aboard the Thunder's Edge," Ji-hoon said in surprisingly good galactic standard. "Admiral Lee is waiting for you in the conference room. If you need anything during your visit, please let me know." Vexstar exchanged glances with his team. This wasn't how conquerors typically behaved. Where were the demands? The show of force? The intimidation tactics that were standard practice for dominant species? The conference room was another surprise. Instead of a sterile military briefing space, it had been arranged with comfortable seating and what appeared to be refreshments suitable for Zilani biology. Admiral Jae-soon Lee sat at the head of the table, but he stood and bowed respectfully. When they entered, Leader Vexstar, the Admiral said, his weathered face showing genuine warmth. "Thank you for coming. I know this must be difficult after everything your people have endured." Vexstar fumbled with his data pads, suddenly uncertain. How to begin? He had rehearsed surrender speeches, but the human's friendly demeanor threw him completely off balance. "Admiral Lee, we have prepared terms for our submission to human authority. Our scientists have compiled our research data, and our economists have assessed our remaining resources." Jae-soon looked confused for a moment, then understanding dawned in his eyes. He reached across the table and gently pushed the datapads back toward Vexstar. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. We don't want your submission. We're here to help you rebuild." Instead of surrender terms, the Admiral placed a different set of documents on the table. Vexstar's translator worked quickly, displaying the contents on his visual display. What he saw made his heart skip a beat. Reconstruction schedules, medical aid packages, engineering support for infrastructure repair, food distribution plans for displaced civilians, educational exchange programs, scientific cooperation agreements. Every document was focused on helping the Zilani recover from the Vorthok attack. "I don't understand," Vexstar said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "We called you Deathworlders. We expected conquest. Our databases said humans only. Respond to problems with violence." Jae-soon smiled tiredly, and for the first time, Star saw past the intimidating exterior to the exhausted leader beneath. "We are what our world made us," the Admiral admitted. "Earth is a dangerous place, and it's shaped us into something that can survive anywhere. But that doesn't mean we're your enemy. The Vorthok threatened innocent lives. We responded accordingly." Through the conference rooms, viewports, Vexstar could see the human fleet in action. But instead of the weapons platforms he expected, he saw something remarkable. Engineering ships were deploying orbital construction platforms above New Zelthera. Medical vessels were ferrying supplies to the surface. Transport ships were delivering prefabricated shelters and food synthesizers. Captain Duyan Park entered the conference room, carrying additional reports. "Admiral, the first wave of reconstruction equipment is being deployed. Our engineers estimate they can have basic infrastructure restored within 2 weeks. The medical teams are already treating Vorthok attack survivors in the temporary hospitals." She turned to Vexstar and his delegation. "Leader, I want you to know that our medical staff has been working around the clock to help your people. We've developed treatments for Vorthok toxin exposure, and our psychologists are trained to help with trauma recovery." Vexstar felt his legs give out, and he sank into his chair. Around the table, his diplomatic team stared in shock at the displays showing human aid operations across their world. This wasn't conquest. This was the largest humanitarian mission they had ever witnessed. "Why?" Vexstar asked, the word coming out as barely a whisper. "Why are you helping us? What do you gain from this?" Admiral Jazoon leaned back in his chair, and for a moment, he looked older than his years. "My species has seen what happens when good people have nowhere to turn for help. We've been there ourselves, facing threats that seemed impossible to overcome. We swore that if we ever had the power to help others in that situation, we would." He gestured toward the viewport, where human ships continued their work. "The galaxy is full of predators. Leader Vexstar. Some hunt for food, some for territory. Some for the simple pleasure of causing pain. But there are also protectors, guardians, who hunt the hunters. That's what we choose to be. Captain Yunji's voice came over the intercom. Admiral, the last of the Vorthok biosignatures has been eliminated from the outer system. All Zilani worlds are now clear of infestation. My pilots are beginning long-range patrols to ensure no swarm elements escaped. Thank you, Captain. Jae-soon replied. Then he turned back to Vexstar. Your people called us the wrong hands to receive your SOS, but sometimes the wrong hands are exactly the right ones. The galaxy has predators and prey, but it also has protectors. We're proud to be yours. As the meeting continued, Vexstar learned the full scope of human assistance. They would help rebuild not just the infrastructure, but the civilization itself. Human teachers would work with Zilani educators to help children overcome their trauma. Human scientists would share technology to help prevent future attacks. Human engineers would design new cities that could defend themselves while maintaining the peaceful nature that defined Zilani culture. There's one thing we ask in return, Admiral Jae-soon said as the meeting neared its end. Vexstar tensed, waiting for the real price of salvation to be revealed. We'd like you to consider joining the Terran Protection Alliance, Jae-soon continued. It's not an empire or a federation, it's a mutual defense pact. If you're ever threatened again, you call us. If we're ever in trouble, we hope you'll stand with us. No tribute, no submission. Just friends helping friends. 2 weeks later, as the human fleet prepared to return to their patrol routes, Vexstar stood in the newly constructed spaceport and watched the massive ships preparing for departure. His world was healing. His people were safe. For the first time in months, he felt hope for the future. Admiral Jae-soon approached for the final farewell. And Vexstar found himself doing something he never thought possible. He embraced the human leader. Thank you, he said simply, for everything. Jae-soon smiled. Take care of yourselves. And remember, you're not alone anymore. The galaxy is big and dangerous, but you have friends now. Very dangerous friends, as the human fleet jumped to hyperspace. Vexstar realized the truth that would reshape his species' understanding of the universe. The Deathworlders weren't the monsters they'd feared. They were the guardians every peaceful species hoped existed somewhere in the dark between stars, and the Vorthok had learned, in their final moments, that some prey had very dangerous friends. Indeed, the galaxy was a safer place, because humanity had learned to turn their predatory nature toward protection instead of conquest. They remained apex predators, but they had chosen to hunt only those who threatened the innocent. The end.